saint in the wall. My parents orbited around in the same Montreal cultural scene. My mother more on the francophone side, and my father downtown on the anglophone side, where he was admired and even revered. Nick Maur had enough charm and flair to make him a friend to all. In his first adult incarnation, while Mom was immersed in early feminism at the Radcliffe Institute in the United States, he was a beatnik poet in Montreal who carried a pet rock and recited poetry for beer. He was proud to have been arrested 3 times. He was arrested once during the October crisis triggered by the actions of Separatist Front de Liberation du Quebec members who kidnapped the British Trade Commissioner and the Provincial Minister of Labour, prompting Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau to declare the War Measures Act, and once for reciting poetry nude on a street corner with a copy of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Coney Island of the Mind in one hand and a glass of gin in the other. The third time was for being kicked out of a bar after getting into a brawl with Jack Kerouac, whom Nick was hosting on his trip to Montreal. He admired Kerouac as a writer until he started spewing racist and anti-Semitic conspiracies. That's where my father drew the line. Never afraid to call people out on injustice against the underdog. His strong opinions, always laced with humor, quickly got his stories into point and led to his next career as an acclaimed journalist and political ramble-rouster. My parents' work and interests were in such proximity that both of their first published articles were reviews of the same Frank Zappa show in Montreal. Hers in the French language paper and his in the English language one. Shortly after that, she helped found a French counterculture monthly called Main Miss Takeover. Around that time, my father and a group of like-minded journalists founded the left-wing journal The Late Post. Their circles were small, overlapping, and tight. If my mother's upbringing was distinctly and unfortunately American, my father's was definitely more old world. My paternal grandmother, Theresa Scholastica of Maur, was reportedly not too happy to leave her Swiss Alpine village, Sachelin, on a one-way boat trip in Quebec in 1929 at her best of her prospector husband, Severin Joseph of Maur. Upon reaching Montreal, they became superintendents in an attendant building in the city's immigrant neighborhood, where they lived a life of poverty like many other recent arrivals from Europe. That neighborhood, Le Petit Mont-Royal, would be where my bohemian mother would choose to raise me 50 years later. It was a dynamic, eclectic place to grow up, with its vibrant and hardworking immigrant family run specialty food stores, the Jewish bakery, the Polish fish market, the Greek vegetable store, the French cheese shop. My grandmother was the main breadwinner, literally, as she worked at a bakery, while she managed the building and Rose raised the couple's four children. My father, Nick, was born in 1942, 12 years younger than his older sister. He was the baby, the chosen one. My grandmother, Nick, claimed her family members were direct descendants of Swiss patron saints Nicholas von Flue, the 15th century paragon of virtue who lived the life of a hermit and fasted in a hut on a riverbank until his death. The message came to her while pregnant with my father that his child was a reincarnation of Saint Nicholas. She named her fourth child Nicholas, and he became the embodiment of his mother's spiritual devotion and connection to the household she left behind. The Swiss Alps remained ever present in my larger-than-life eccentric Oftamar family. Crumpled Xeroxes of alpine photos were handed to me every holiday dinner. My grandmother yodeled at all of those meals while stashing leftovers in her purse. When I was 12, grandmother and Aunt Theas brought my father and me on a Swiss Alps pilgrimage to live like Heidi. We hiked above the clouds to visit my great uncle during his summer farm duties. In his off-the-grid cabin, he communicated with the cows with a gigantic elven horn. He walked us through his daily chores and showed me how to churn butter. My father and I slept alongside my aunt and grandmother, already in her 80s, in our clothes in the hayloft above the cows, whose heat kept us warm in the chilly night. It was the most rustic experience my urban father had ever shared. While my father's maternal side zealously claimed a saint as one of their own, his paternal side carried the weight of an ancient lineage. The story, not a legend, is that our family came from one of the three founding cantons of Switzerland. The wall that my family built to stand up to the Austro-Hungarian Empire and lived within created the country as we know it today. In Swiss German, Oftamar translates to on the wall. Remnants of that stone wall still stand today in my grandfather's town of Schwezi, in the canton of Schwezi, in the country of Schwyz. The Swiss are typically so nationalistic that it says a lot that my grandfather, the radical adventurer, broke away from such a pure-blooded historic family line. While my grandmother worked, my grandfather lived out the dream of exploration that had brought the family to Canada. Hunting for rare minerals in the mountains of Quebec, grandfather Oftamar, an engineer and prospector, had acquired a parcel of remote wilderness in Charlevoix County, where he built a small base cabin, began to dig and set up his own hydroelectric energy source from the river outside the lodging to run the lights. For most of my father's preschool years, he lived with his father in this off-the-grid cabin at Maur mining camp in rural Quebec. Fantastic black and white photos of the cabin survive, protected in our messy family archives. Otherwise, their time spent in the mining camp remains a bit of a mystery, as this chapter of the story involves my grandfather who spoke little English, my father who spoke no Swiss German, and a transient cast of wayward miners and prospectors, some from as far away as Russia, Europe, and Texas. Nick was used as a child assistant to Jill for diamonds. Any day now was his father's mantra. Family stories from this time include a tale of finding a baby bear after the mother bear had been shot. After my grandfather skinned the mother bear for her hide, my father cared for the cub and kept it alongside it on the mother's hide in their cabin until it was old enough to return to the wild and fend for itself. It's a story that I think is almost too fantastical to be true, except the photos exist to prove it. The conflict between his transcendental maternal line and the earthly history of his paternal line seems to have created an intense internal tension within my father. After all, walls are built to keep things out, and saints are created to transcend. The dichotomy may have produced the fiery, passionate man he became, but also may have been what drove him to drink. By his mid-20s, my father, Nick, never dad, was leading the entirety modern urban decadent life of a boulevardier. Striding through town in his casual lion suit and fedora, chain-smoking his Gitanes French sans-filtre cigarettes, he looked ready to step into a Fellini film or porcelain writer's salon as he elegantly pursued his daily drinking habit. He soon became practiced in man-on-the-street style journalism. His notoriety soon resulted in his hosting of his own ahead-of-its-time television show on the CBC, cleverly titled Quel Show. In each episode, he and his sidekick, Les Nirenberg, would stand on the busiest corner of the city and ask passerby, "What is on your mind?" They turned citizens' opinions on everything from the latest snow removal debacle to elections and birth control into entertainment. The wildly original show captured the cultural transition and moment in Montreal history from 1969 to 1973 through the words of its people. In many ways, Montreal was going through the same cultural revolution of any major city in North America in the 1960s. Long hair, peace protests, racial equality, and citizens questioning the government, the 1950s dream, and the man. At the same time, in the wake of the quiet revolution of the 1960s, the Quebec independence movement was being born. Both of my parents became very passionate about and involved in the growing Quebec separatist movement. They shared a passion to fight for the underdog, which forged their identities in this time and place. The province and reclaiming its French and Latin roots and rejecting the British puritanical rule that had taken over much of North America. a struggle that I was not intellectually in tune with my youth, but that subconsciously informed my understanding of the social history of the city that made me. My father's newspaper columns and the success of the TV show made him a trusted, fearless household name in Montreal. Inspired by what he was hearing as a man-on-the-street journalist, he decided to run for local office as an independent in 1974 and won his first city council seat. He spent the rest of his life in politics and journalism, reporting and fighting for the people of Montreal. A true friend to all, he kept his number listed in the phone book, inviting calls at all hours of the day and night. The cast of characters who reached out to him to be heard or to vent their concerns was vast. Everyone from the nuns at the convent in his jurisdiction who wanted a correction to their garbage collection schedule, to the businessman who was struggling to get a permit to expand his business, from the homeless who had no way out of a bad cycle, and the gangster trying to get out of trouble, to the inmate who was seeking support from people outside, which led my father to commission wall-mounted wood cutouts of Donald Duck and his three nephews from the prison shop, which hang on my walls today. True to his reputation as a man of the people, he had the genuine and gutless talent for connecting with every person he encountered and for sharing their stories with others. In his early 30s, just as his career was coming into strong focus, Nick received a big surprise. 2 years earlier, he had met my mother at a lunch party for men and me's at the discotheque Pample Mouse. They exchanged numbers and went on a few dates. Determined to have a child on her own, Mom had stopped using birth control and was being, in her own words, selective about whom she slept with. During the summer of 1971, she persuaded my father to join her for the weekend at a friend's country cottage that resulted in my conception. 9 months later, on March 17th, 1972, she walked herself a few blocks to the closest hospital alone to give birth to me. A massive snowstorm had shut down Montreal that day, making the streets impassable, with no cars or taxis in sight. People were skiing in the streets. 30 years later, for my mother's 16th birthday, I just depicted that solo walk in the watercolor painting that she keeps framed and hanging in her office on our first day together, immortalized in my childlike painting style. When I was born, we lived in a basement apartment in downtown Montreal. There was no one for us to come home to, no family to help, only random young babysitters whose names and stories we do not know today. My mother wanted to do it all herself, to be a mother and to have a career in journalism. Despite her bohemian lifestyle, I was not breastfed. It doesn't appear to have the results of leftover 1950s industrial damage, but more the result of her decision to be a single mother working full-time. It made her unavailable to offer me that. I have never asked her if she considered the emotional or physical impacts this would have on a child. When I was 2, she took a job at the Canada Council of the Arts that required her to work in Ottawa every week for 4 days at a time, for a few days at a time. A series of young women took care of me in Montreal when she worked to commute to Ontario. What might she have been thinking? Perhaps that counterculture acts in intellectual strength are more important than traditional domestic home environments at a time of revolution? After all, my birth had been a personal and political act, not one born from love. Mom's fierce independence was part of her determination to be a single mother and also of her desire to initially keep me a secret from my father. Her one night stand ladies' man in 1973 when in 1973 when I was 1 year old, she chose to inform him of my existence. The toddlers at my daycare mostly had two parents present, and it finally sank in for Mom that she was just a matter of time before I started asking, "Who's my father?" She felt she owed it to me to be able to give an honest answer. They were both working as freelance journalists at the CBC when my mother called Nick into a meeting in the 18th floor boardroom one day. He assumed they'd been discovering a news story. Instead, she told him, "I have to your daughter. I don't want anything from you. I just want to be able to tell you who the father is if she asks." A child with no strings attached was a priceless gift to an eternal bachelor. Right there and then, at the conference table, Mom changed Nick's life. He was shocked to hear the news and fell in love with her on the spot. My father recounted this part of the story to me as a simple and believable narrative, sweet and honorable on both sides. Mom was independent and didn't need anything from a man, but wanted to be able to tell her daughter the truth about her father. Nick was responsive and joined our family in a modern kind of way. Soon after, I took off for our year-long trip overseas. Not long after we returned, Nick moved into the apartment next door to us, and his commitment to be a presence in my life, and the courting of Mom to be his wife began. Nick's choice to move into our apartment building made him consistent physical presence. I vividly remember how on my 4th birthday, the first I spent with him, my mother sent me to go see him next door. The apartments were connected by a rickety back balcony, which offered access to each apartment via its backdoor kitchen. I navigated the elaborate back balcony and made my way through his kitchen and walked down the long hallway into the bright lit front living room. I was sparsely furnished, but in the center of the room was a cozy old armchair, and on it sat a cute little teddy bear. "Happy birthday, Melissa," Nick said from the other side of the room, with his mischievous, mustached grin and giggle. I reached for the teddy bear and looked into its glassy, strangely human brown eyes. My little girl instinct was to name the bear after this man with the walrus grin popping out from underneath the bushy mustache. "I will call him Nicholas," I said. It's hard to know what came first for a child at that moment, whether it's giving the bear his name was a genuine response to my father's affection or a response to his need to be a part of my life. Either way, Nicholas the bear had since accompanied me on tours around the world and now lives in my bedroom in Houston, New York. I love that bear, just as I instantly loved the new gift-giving man and mums in my lives. 1 year later, Nick proposed to my mother, and a traditional wedding was held in an old church, followed by a reception in a French bistro. Amazing black and white photos of the day depict a classic 1970s wedding with my father's gregarious friends in wide-collared suits and velvet bow ties, and my mother's bohemian girlfriends with flowing floor-length dresses and long hair. My milquetoast Boston family mingled with my eccentric off-the-Mars side, coming together around a gorgeous bride and groom, both 35 years old, who looked deeply in love. I was the 5-year-old flower girl in ring bearer, and I remember the sunny, joyful day fondly. I was as much a part of the ceremony as they were. There's just a few pages left, but I'm going to take this time to show you the pictures of this book so far.